Howdy, today I'd like to look at the third part of Unit 13. Unit 13 is all about pyramids, cones, and spheres, and we are heading towards finding the surface area of pyramids and cones, but today we're focusing on the slant height of those objects. So if you'll look at page 10, we'll get started on topic 3. First of all, in the Pythagorean Theorem, we recall that this side here is called the hypotenuse, and it's given the letter C. So in order to find that hypotenuse, C is the square root of 2.7 squared plus 6.5 squared. And so we can grab the calculator and work this out. It's the big square root. Some of you like to do it like this, where I do it all at once. Sometimes I do it like this. And sometimes I find, oh, I didn't do it. Here's the way I really like to do it, because it's a little tricky with the parentheses and all that. 2.7 squared plus 6.5 squared. I do what's under the radical first, or under the square root, and then I say let's square root 49.54, or sometimes I use the answer function. And this tells me C is 7.04. on that first example. And if I look at example 2, where's example 2? Well, we'll do example 2 here. If I do example 2, this is 3.9. It's a right triangle. And in this case, I know the hypotenuse, but I don't know this side. And we usually call that side B. And so B is the square root of the hypotenuse squared minus 3.9 squared, or generally that's written like this, C squared minus A squared. And so now in my calculator, I'm going to go 11 squared minus 3.9 squared. That's 105.79. And then I can square root 105.79, or this time I'll use the answer function and get 10.29. So B in this case is 10.29. And so the whole objective here is to find the third side of a triangle, or of a right triangle specifically, using the Pythagorean theorem. So what is slant height? Well, as we mentioned the other day, the altitude is the distance from that top point down perpendicular to the bottom. That's called the altitude, and that's true whether it's a cone or whether it's a pyramid like that one. Now, the slant height, I like to think of it as if the object was solid and I was standing up here on the top of that cone and I slid down the cone. Sliding down the cone right there, I would be on the slant height. It's a longer distance than falling straight down if you could go through the cone. Or the same idea on the pyramid. So we want to figure out how to find that slant height, and it uses the Pythagorean theorem, as you might expect. So this one says find the slant height of the cone. So on the cone, I'm going to look at this triangle. And that's a right triangle because the altitude always makes a right angle with the base. Now, if that long part across there is 14, this distance is going to be 7. And so I end up with essentially a triangle that looks like this, where this distance is 7, this distance 11, and this distance is the one I don't know. This is the slant height. And so to find the slant height, that's the hypotenuse. So C squared equals the square root of 11 squared plus 7 squared. The slant height will always be the hypotenuse. The altitude is one of the legs of those triangles. And so I end up here with 11 squared plus 7 squared is 170. And then I want to take the square root of that answer to get 13.04. They gave me units, so the units, it's just line segment, so the units are one-dimensional feet. Okay, now here we want to find the altitude, but we're given the slant height of 14. And so I'm going to draw that triangle again. It's this, there's the altitude. And so I know my slant height is 14. And it says here that this distance is 9. That's convenient. And this distance right here is the one that I don't know. Now you can see that that's, again, a right triangle, but this time I know the hypotenuse. It's the other side I don't know. So it's 14 squared minus 9 squared. Or in my calculator, 14 squared minus 9 squared. And then the square root of that. 10.72. And the units are feet, because the units in the problem are feet. All right, let's look at another one. This says find the slant height. So the slant height is, let's see, let me draw my triangle. Here's my altitude. And this distance right here is my slant height. So I don't know the slant height. That's what I'm looking for. I know my altitude is 18. What is this? Well, that is the apothem. And this one was kind of nice because the apothem of a square-based pyramid is half the side, or half the length of the side. So if this is 22, that apothem is going to be 11. So it's the hypotenuse I'm looking for. It's the square root. When it's the hypotenuse, I'm adding these things here. When it's the hypotenuse, I'm adding those sides. When it's a leg, I'm subtracting those sides. So now it's the square root of 445. 21.1. And the units are centimeters, 21.1 centimeters. So the biggest trick, of course, is seeing if you can take the three-dimensional object and just extract a right triangle out of it, and be sure that you're labeling it correctly so you know if you're trying to find the slant height, which is this diagonal part, or the hypotenuse, or if you're trying to find the altitude, which is going to be this distance right here. There are the formulas again on the back of your notebook if you need them. And as always, check with your teacher or rewatch the video if you need any help. Go Cougars.